Good morning, everybody. My name is Eugenio Moreno. I'm engagement director at infraone, a company where we protect in critical infrastructure all around Europe and the globe. And I want to start with a sentence that is probably going to make every CIO and CISO in the webinar a little uncomfortable, which is that you can patch a running plan. That is a reality. It's not a metaphor, and it's literal and operational constraint that defines how huge part of the global economy actually runs. Pharmaceutical lines, chemical reactors, water and wastewater treatment, food production, energy grid. The system behind all of those critical infrastructure that affects directly the society, they cannot just be stopped because someone in IT got a CVE in their inbox. So for most of the last 20 years, that was uncomfortable, but some way manageable. But the threat landscape moved slowly enough that OT could move slowly as well. We used to say that OT was 10 years behind IT. It happened with IT communication, for instance, but the balance just broke, and over the next 20 minutes, more or less, we'll tell you more about it and what to do about it. Last month, as you all know, a single AI model, you already know Mythos, autonomously discovered thousands of zero-day vulnerabilities across every major operating system and browser. And it didn't stop at discovery, but it wrote working exploits for them. Let's put some numbers on what that means for all of you. In 2018, the average time for a vulnerability being disclosed to a working exploit being available was around 2.5 years. In 2026, with Mythos class capabilities, that time is under 1 day, sometimes hours. And Mythos has a 72% success rate at generating functional exploits. The oldest bug that it found was 27 years old. So that means that we have more than 20 years of dormant attack surface that is suddenly weaponized in an afternoon. Here's the part that security industry hasn't fulfilled absorbed yet. The economics of an attack has changed completely and permanently. Discovery is no longer expensive, exploit development is no longer expensive, and the attacker's curve just collapsed. And we, in the defender side, we are still running in the old economics. We are still planning around patch cycles. We are still budgeting around quarterly risk review. We still assume there is window between the vulnerability being known and the vulnerability being weaponized. We still wait until the next year to accomplish some mitigation because it is not in the budget anymore. But that window is gone. Now, all of you have hundreds of fires. Why should OT be the one that you are paying attention this morning after this webinar? So OT attacks are growing more than 60% year over year. That is faster than IT threat grows. The attackers have figured out that something that sometimes from the defender side are catching up slowly, which is that OT is the weak spot. OT assets are exposed to the internet up more than 40% every year. Every digitalization project, every industry 4.0 project, every plant that connects to the historian to the internet, that adds to that number. More than 21% of the OT enabled sites were breached in the last year with operational impact. That means that it's not an alert. It's operational impact. It means lines stopped, batches lost, patients delayed, shifts sent home. The cost of getting it wrong in OT is no longer measured in gigabytes or megabytes like in AT. It's measured in millions of euros per hour in a pharma plant, in a chemical plant, in a food shipment that missed during the peak season. We are talking that OT networks also affect the safety mechanisms that protect not only the process, but also the environment and the people around. So it is very critical for the safety of the people involved as well. OT used to be the IT's quiet cousin, but it is not. It is now the loudest line item on the risk register, and we need to pay attention very carefully to it. Here is where most of IT trained security leaders get into trouble, because OT looks like IT. At the end, an IP network is an IP network everywhere. It runs on Ethernet, it has servers, it has Windows machines, but it is fundamentally different planet. And the assumption that work in IT will quietly breaks you in OT. I will give you also a few examples that you can see here. First of all, the operating systems. We are talking about Windows XPs, Windows Servers 2003, firmwares from 2009. These are not theoreticals, these are running production lines today in most of the regulated industries in Europe. Not because anyone wants them there, but because the validate process around them costs millions to requalify and to change them. Also, the protocols that runs on an industrial network are fundamentally different from the IT network. Most of them were designed in the 90s, where network security wasn't a design requirement. They are completely invisible to a generic CM, for instance. And there is no security by design when we talk about these protocols, and they are also very sensitive to some kind of process or time constraint when we are talking about real-time protocols that are running on those networks as well. Also, maintenance windows. In OT, you patch on Tuesday. In OT, you patch once a year, sometimes less. Pharmaceutical plant might have one scheduled stop in 18 months, continuous chemical process every 3 years. Maybe these shutdowns are very short shutdowns just for mechanical purposes, and you cannot change anything else because you cannot requalify the process. So patching is not a scheduled task. It's a board level decision involving engineering, quality, regulatory, and also operations. So when you bring an IT playbook into OT, the playbook doesn't just underperform. It breaks against the reality because the plan works in a completely different way, and you need to know how the OT field operates in order to propose feasible mitigations. If you put these two trends next to each other, on one side you have time to exploit, which has collapsed from 2.3 years to under 1 day, as we mentioned, in less than a decade. It's accelerating even more with the capabilities that we talked before. On the other side, the OT maintenance window, it is exactly the same that it was 20 years ago. Sometimes it's even narrow, because we have more production requests and pressure from the customers of the end customer, of the end provider, so it is even less. Between the gap between how fast the attacks now happen and how slowly OT can respond, it is the single and most important risk signal in our industry right now. If you only remember one thing about this presentation, remember this gap, because it is very important, and I will tell you some decisions that need to be taken about this gap. When the Cloud Security Alliance, like most serious security organizations, published a strong playbook from the AI vulnerability era, 11 priority actions, solid material, were published, but there's just one problem. This playbook was written for OT. 3 of those priority actions, they are the foundational ones, assume capabilities most OT environments simply don't have. Rapid patching, we mentioned, you can't. Maintenance windows are months apart. Patching means stopping production. In regular sectors, it means requalifying a process under regulatory supervision. Automated response, that is something you cannot do as well. Auto quarantine a device may affect directly an industrial protocol, which can stop a running production live because the protocol is running in layer 2 communication, for instance. And it's something that probably maintenance or engineering team are going to change in an urgent manner. So you cannot auto quarantine a device in this kind of communication. Also, the code level analysis and fixes, you can't either. The code is logged, it is inside a firmware version of a vendor that was written 15 years or 20 years ago. You don't own the source. In many cases, the vendor is no longer in business. None of this means that the CSA playbook is wrong, but it means that it is incomplete for the world that most of actually the OT operates. Apply the IT version of this priority directly to OT, and you will spend a lot of money and tools that simply cannot run in the real OT world. So at InfraOne, what we have done is we've built the bridge. We map every one of those 11 CSA priorities back to the OT reality, where they translate directly. We keep them, but where they break, we replace them. What came out on the other side, what that you can see on the right, it's what we call the Mythos readiness framework. 5 priorities that actually work in the industrial environment and that we want to talk about with you in this webinar. In order to simplify this a little bit, you have all the detail in the publication with the CSA, but we have grouped these controls into 3 main pillars: segmentation, detection and response, and vendor and patch lifecycle. And we are going to talk about these 3 pillars in the following minutes. So pillar 1, when you cannot patch, and we just established that most of the cases you can patch, you segment. But there's a problem where most organizations stop reading and miss the point. Segmentation in OT is not only a network design exercise. It is a process intelligence and context analysis exercise, which is a very different context. You cannot segment what you don't understand, or you will fail. You will be disturbing the production, and that you will have, like we say, you will have one chance. The first chance you stop the line, the second chance you are out of the factory. So you cannot segment what you don't understand. So before any firewall rule is written, 3 things have to happen. The first of all is a process and asset mapping. Which asset serves which production process? In real plants, you will find PLCs sitting inside a cabinet that nobody documented, controlling half of a production area, plugged in years ago by a technician who has since left the company. We have reviewed PLC source of 100 of projects, and there is always an undocumented flow somewhere. Without this map, segmentation is useless because it will break at some point, and we need to adapt also to the shutdown window that we have in order to segment. Second of all is process criticality zoning. Traffic inside production zone, and this is very related to the security standards frameworks. What we call the east-west communication is fundamentally different from the traffic crossing IT to OT, which is called north-south communication. Treating them the same is one of the most expensive mistakes, because a vulnerability have to be prioritized based on the operational impact, not by CVS's score. A medium severity CVE, for instance, on a controller that runs a safety problem is more critical than a critical severity CVE, which is running on a printer. So it's not only about how critical the score is, but it's also about how critical the impact on the production system is. Also, an affordable blueprint. Some principles that will help you to standardize your architecture so you can make your whole infrastructure, OT infrastructure, more secure and more standard in order to scale in a proper way, fulfilling all these frameworks. Like single zone rule, one device should only be part of one zone, deny by default, fail-safe behavior, because in OT, OT fail closed can mean that a tank overflows or there's a problem with a safety system. We cannot allow that. VLAN governance, layer 4 and layer 7 policies, and where most of segmentation programs quietly fail is the vendor onboarding controls. Vendors with remote access can punch a hole through any design you build, and most companies have no governance around it. You build a perfect system, but then if you don't control who is operating in your infrastructure, it will break the blueprint and the system itself. Second pillar is the detection. OT detection requires expertise that barely exists in the market today. We know very well about this. and the gap between the supply of that expertise and the demand for it is increasing and becoming dangerous nowadays. So here is a simply way to frame the problem. You are an IT SOC, no matter how good, has roughly zero visibility below Purdue level 3, which means that once the traffic crosses into your production network, your enterprise tooling goes blind. Industrial protocol like Modbus, SSM communication, OPC UA, these protocols need deep packet inspection built specifically for them, and most of the generic CMs simply don't have it. Even if you had visibility, response is harder than in IT. Like we mentioned, auto quarantine is the default response in IT, but in OT it could shut down a reactor. So response in OT is never just a cyber decision. It's a cyber plus operation plus safety plus quality. Every runbook has to account for that. And there's the people problem that we mentioned. This skill set that you need in order to be able to fulfill all these requirements is a process engineering plus cybersecurity. Someone who can read an OT alert and understand whether it represents an attack or not. That overlaps between process engineering and cybersecurity barely exists in the labor market these days. We spent over a decade building this ourselves, and it's still our hardest hiring profile. At InfraOne, we have these profiles, and trust me, we take very good care of them. What actually works is not what most vendors will sell you. It's not 24/7 monitoring as a starting point, because you cannot protect what you cannot understand. It is an extended baseline that helps you to understand and analyze your context with very little detail, weeks of learning, every plan, every line, every shift pattern, because any alert, before any alert goes live, it is a process-aware churning per production line. It is a level 1 or level 2 OT SOC running in parallel to your IT SOC, not folded into it, because you need to have very dedicated expertise on that field, understanding which are the industrial protocols running, which are the standard communication between main control and supervision systems in the market, understand how shifts operates, because sometimes are not regulate shifts and runs based on batches, for instance. So you need to understand all of this in order to be able to apply proper playbooks to the environment. Last but not least, the third pillar, it's basically a vendor advisory wave is coming, since the 0-day vulnerabilities were discovered. Within the next 12 months or possibly less, every major industrial automation vendor and major cybersecurity vendors are going to publish disclosure trigger AI discovery vulnerabilities, and some of these vendors, especially in the automation part, they are no longer available for a support request. So talking about vendor and patch lifecycle splits, we can do it in two columns. One side, on the left, the things that you can patch, and on the right, the things that you cannot patch. For the things that you can patch, the entire game is at triage speed. You need a live inventory up to date, and a static inventory is useless. Next day you finish it, because usually OT, unluckily, OT environments are growing a lot, and you need to know every device, every firmware version, every dependency refreshed in hours, but not in weeks or months. When you have an advisory, you need to answer one question very fast: which of my sites are affected and how badly? Then a second question, which is, do I wait for the next maintenance window, or do I isolate these assets now? And finally, do I have a compensating control already in place that buy me time? Or do I need to go directly for it? If you can answer those questions within an hour or few hours, you are good. But if it takes weeks, you are going to spend the following months operating blind. For the things that you cannot patch, and there will be more than most of you think, the game is different. The answer is hardening, isolation, and containing. a dedicated OT Active Directory. This is something we are discussing a lot, for instance, lately with our customers, in a separate forest from the corporate one. So a compromise in the corporate side doesn't walk straight into the plan. Legacy-aware endpoint for security, endpoint security for Windows XP and Windows Server 2003, which we mentioned, they do exist, because it is something that we call investment protection in OT. It is something that always happens in OT, and it will keep happening. Life cycles need to be longer because of the investment that we do in OT. We cannot replace like the user device in IT every 3 years. And all those devices and operating system, they should not be running unprotected. For instance, we can virtualize and contain these assets that cannot be replaced. And we are currently working in a lot of migration projects that involve legacy systems, and we need to migrate into a new infrastructure which requires a deep analysis of each one of these assets and detailed knowledge on how to migrate without disturbing the production. And also very important is the governance part. Clear roles between plan operations and IT and compliance, so we can agree before the next advisory and not after. And it is very important because otherwise all the documentation that we have generated of all the assets, the assessment results, the security plan, director plans, everything will fail if the governance is not clear at the end with roles and responsibilities. Also, one little detail that matters is that a handful of industrial vendors, they got early access to the predecessor of Mythos, which was known as Glasswing. Many of them are companies whose equipment sits in your plants right now, so the advisory wave is not a forecast, it is already in its way, and it will take a very short time to get to us. So if we take one step back, let's have a look on what is actually happening. There are three forces which are converging at exactly the same moment. AI is accelerating the attack speed and the attack volume by orders of magnitude. Time to exploit, as we say, it is under 1 day. Regulation is tightening fast. NIS2 is enforced. IEC 62443 adoption is no longer optional in most of the regulated sector. GMP Annex 11 is being rewritten. Of course, as you know, personal liability for security leadership is now in the legislation in multiple jurisdictions. So it takes direct responsibility for the board about it. And the installed base is in most cases still unprotected. Most of the OT environment, this is the reality, still lack basic segmentation, dedicated endpoint security, or OT specific monitoring. Each of these alone will be a serious agenda for a CISO, but all of them are happening at the same time. That is why we say that a perfect storm is forming. So if you want to do something in the tomorrow morning or next Monday morning, these are the 3 steps that we will take. First of all, you cannot protect what you don't know. That's something we mentioned. So find your OT. I want to insist on this because I see it constantly. Pure IT CISOs assume that they have no OT exposure. They almost always do. Building management system, lab equipment, R&D environments, ABAC, manufacturing, whether you say a physical product, map it, because even a roadmap is more useful than a non-map or a perfect map in 6 months. So you need to know what are you protecting. Second, ask yourself, pick one production environment and ask yourself a single question. If Mythos class capabilities hit it tomorrow, what will actually stop this lateral movement, this east-west communication that we talked about before? If you cannot answer this in a sentence, the boundary just doesn't exist, and this is your starting point. And finally, find the right partners, because I'll be direct about this, because it's the question I guess most often. Most organizations, they cannot build the process engineering plus cybersecurity skill that overlaps internally fast enough to match the speed of the threat. External OT specialists close the gap quickly, so pick the partner who actually knows your sector and who can show you operational outcomes and not only on the slide deck. And here is where we can definitely help you. So I leave you with this thought, because for most of the last decade, OT security was a conversation about when we should do this. Next budget, next plan, upgrade, next compliance cycle. But this window between we should do this and we needed this yesterday just closed. So if you take one phone call when you leave this room, you should take it the one about OT. So thank you very much. We will be available for you about any question or any requirement you have. Thank you very much.